Why is it that jazz is America's music? Is it because we gave birth to it?
That's like your son or your daughter. It's yours.
Yeah. It really is our unique music form.
It is ours. It's a part. It's an important and essential part of what I like to call the American mythology. It's an art form. If a group of people are fortunate enough to create an art form, the art form really gives you a painless way to learn about yourself. Really, it's a lot like kids. You know, you see your kid, something comes out their mouth, you say, ooh, oh, that's mama or that's daddy coming out there. I need to check that. Or other things you say, wow, I feel good about that.
Yeah.
So an art form exists for that reason, and jazz is the thing that most successfully deals with our way of living in sound.
Yeah. Mr. President, is it parallel to the American experience? Is it connected to the American experience beyond what Wynton just said?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you had African rhythms, melodies, European instruments. The first place they all got together. And I think then a whole new genre was created. And I think it really, you find a lot of parallels in the way America developed in other ways. I mean, jazz is about creativity within a certain order. And it's sort of made for people that are creative and entrepreneurial. It also gave black people a little way to be free and escape from the boxes they were in, which was an extra added benefit, and it gave white people a way to get rid of a lot of their stereotypes if they had enough musical ability and rhythm to get into the act. So I think, you know, I think there are a lot of reasons why jazz, there are historical reasons why what were the antecedents of jazz started in our country. We had the people and the mix of historical musical roots, and our religion in our religious music, and you know, the whole thing just kind of worked. And but if you look at the way it developed, I think America was a perfect country for it to develop.
Yeah.
And I think that there is something about freedom and jazz that work together. I mean, it's no accident that jazz was important in the Czech Revolution. It's no accident that I just got back from Asia, and now that Korea is a lot freer country than ever before, and I heard some of the best jazz music I've ever heard in my life there. I mean, the scholars here can say more about this than me, but I'm just telling you what I have observed in my life, and I think that there's something to it.
Let me start by saying something about parallels between jazz and democracy. Neither one was there from the very beginning. At the start of the Republic, Americans didn't talk about democracy. It was a word that had very, very special usages, coming from the Greek, the word demos, and applied to one segment of society. Americans felt that they lived in a republic, and they were citizens of the republic, and they talked about republicanism. The concept of democracy emerged very gradually during the course of the 19th century. Moreover, Abraham Lincoln's democracy was not the same as Teddy Roosevelt's democracy, and Franklin Roosevelt's democracy was still something else. It's important to keep in mind that Franklin Roosevelt's democracy was more inclusive than notions of democracy and patterns of democracy that had preceded. What is parallel to all of that in jazz? Before jazz, there was vernacular African American music, out of which evolved the blues, out of which evolved ragtime, and then very early in the 20th century, jazz emerged. But the jazz that King Oliver played in the 1920s was different from the jazz that Benny Goodman played in the 30s and 40s, and that in turn was different from the jazz that Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie played at mid-century. And gradually, jazz became increasingly inclusive, just as American democracy did.
I see all music, particularly the performing groups, as music and community. I use the musical experience and large performing groups to help bridge that gap from the me-centered world to the we-centered world, where it is perfectly okay to lose or to put some of the individualism in the background that we all feel. Push it back so the whole group can maybe sound better. In a jazz quintet, if the drummer's too loud, I don't really care what's going on with everybody else. It's pretty hard to hear. Listening skills are what we need to teach kids today. If we could teach kids at an early age how to listen to jazz, what to listen for, why it works together. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe we might live in a different world. Maybe those kids, when they were 15, instead of coming to fists on the play yard, when they couldn't agree or they couldn't communicate. And if they had listening skills, they might be able to figure out where each one was coming from.
When I was a teenager and really got serious about jazz, I realized that Dexter Gordon had gone to Scandinavia and found a less racist society, but he also made those people more interested in America. And now, I think jazz as a global phenomenon, it was not been. We don't appreciate the extent to which it's made people feel good about America, even if they disagree with who happens to be in power or what our policies are at a given time. People think that there's something good about us if they live in a country where jazz is big. Last trip I made to Russia as president, there's a little bitty old auditorium in the big Kremlin, and Vladimir Putin organized a goodbye present for me to thank me for 8 years of trying to help him stay afloat. He had a kids' jazz orchestra play. Then he had an 80-year-old man who had been playing jazz for 60 years play. And then the lights went out, and in the dark, he had Igor Butman, my favorite living saxophone player, play Nostalgia in the dark. But I got to thinking about how he was this Russian guy that he wasn't all that sure about what the future was going to be, although it was basically positive. But all those people liked us because they saw us through the eyes of jazz. It was amazing. When I go to Nigeria and they bring the Nigerian musicians on that are popular and they sound like jazz musicians. I just think that's something we don't appreciate, the extent to which jazz has made our democracy and our country look good in other places, even when there were black musicians going to places where they'd face less racism than they did at home. Even then they couldn't help making us look better, because if we had this thing that they had brought, we couldn't be all bad.